renowned scholar and researcher from Poland, Professor Konrad Podezewicz, a senior researcher at the Center for Advanced Studies of Population and Religion, and a professor in the Department of International Affairs of Krakow University in Poland, Krakow University of Economics, in Poland. Professor Konrad is an author of numerous publications on religion and ethnicity in the process of migration, Islam and Muslims in Europe. And he also focused on the politicization of Islam in Europe and Middle East and North Africa. He has published many monographs like Muslim in Western Europe in 2007, and New Muslim Elite in European Cities in 2010, Polish Migration Policy in 2015, and more recently, the transformation of Islamism in Egypt and Tunis in the shadow of the Arab Spring. So with his impressive resume, you can see Professor Konrad is really an expert on Islam and Muslim in Europe. Today, he will bring to us the lecture on Islam and Muslim citizenship in Europe. I'm sure many viewers here and like many other brothers and sisters in the world has been very concerned and witnesses some development events happening in Europe and to Muslim communities and to the society at large there. So today we would like to hear from Professor Konrad to interpret this and in a very academic and scholarly with rich knowledge and accurate historical background to understand Muslim and Muslim communities and Islamic practice in Europe. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Konrad.
Thank you very much, Xiaojin, for this kind invitation and introduction. It's a great pleasure to present some of my work to the World Muslim Communities Council. What I want to do in this time allocated, I want to take you to the tour in Europe and to tell you a little bit about the situation of Muslims in Europe and also about the Muslim citizenship as far as I see it. What I'm going to do within this 45 minutes to 1 hour is I'm going to tell you about a little bit about the history of Islam in Europe. It is very important to understand to have the historical perspective while we look at the even current events in Europe. So first, I'll very briefly say a few things about European past from medieval times up until today. Then I'll say a little bit about biggest Muslim populations in contemporary Western Europe, and also I will give you a snapshot of a smaller community, but super interesting, that we have in Poland. And then I'll go and talk about transformations within Islam in contemporary Western Europe, and the very important questions that is in the minds of many Muslims in Europe and outside is the stigmatization of Muslims in the face of various types of terrorist attacks carried out in the name of Islam, and increasing mobilization of young European Muslims around religious identity. And this is the last part of my presentation today will be devoted to this issue of Muslim citizenship as far as I see it. So the very first slide is probably you recognize at least one of these photos, which is on the first slide. And the photo obviously is the interior of the Mezquita, which is nowadays the cathedral in Cordoba. And this is obviously, this is the glorious past of Islam in Europe, in Andalusia, which I'm going to say a few words at the very beginning about. But then the second photo, which you may not recognize, but you clearly can recognize the same pattern, the same type of architectural work. Obviously, it's mihrab here. It's something on the top is something else. But this is obviously the idea is to revive in a way this past. And this is a mihrab in the masjid, in mosque, which was opened in 2003 in Grenada. So after more than 500 years of Muslim absence in the city of Grenada, the mosque was open, a beautiful mosque, and this is the masjid of this mosque. And I think these two photos very nicely talk about the past and the present, which will be the case of my lecture today. So when researchers look at the presence of Muslims in Europe, from Jürgen Jels and Felice d'Assetto, the pioneers of Islam, of research on Islam in Europe, what we normally see is this the delineation of the faces of the Muslim presence in Europe. And what I will be discussing today is mostly the so-called fourth phase, which is the migration of Muslims to Europe, mostly after the Second World War, which is a mass immigration. It has been taking place already in the before the Second World War, less probably explored, but obviously that demographically it was not so important as it is happening after the Second World War, and what makes the huge Muslim populations in contemporary Europe. But also, we shouldn't forget about earlier phases that have also left not only architectural, cultural remainings in Europe, but also societal, like demographic remainings. And here I mean especially the periods that I won't be exploring, but I'll give you an example of the Muslim community in Poland, which is partially an example of this case, which is the second phase, the Golden Horde, and to some small extent expansion of the Ottoman Empire. But mostly this concerns Southern Europe more than Central Europe, where this presence has not really left any significant remaining. So starting from the past, the very presence of Islam in Europe starts in medieval Sicily and Spain. The first Muslim visits to the island are being recorded already in the 7th century, and then the very important expedition of the Euphemius and Ziyar Allah takes place in 1827. And at a certain moment in this Muslim rule in Sicily, the power of the rulers of Muslim rulers of Sicily is so big that even the Vatican needs to pay a tribute to them. And the Renaissance is normally considered as the 10th century, when in Palermo only there were, according to the historical records, around 300 mosques. And here, what you see obviously on this photo is today's cathedral in Palermo, but similarly to the situation, for example, in Seville or on some other Spanish cities, a lot of these parts of the cathedrals are former mosques, or the case of Mesquita that I showed at the very beginning in Alhambra. So when the Normans with Roger I take over at the end of 11th century, Islam is very much an Arabic culture, is very much part of the Sicilian reality, to such an extent that even if you look at the historical artifacts, you will see that, for example, the Normans have been using Arabic language in their scripture, and they've taken the Arabic culture as a and was part of how society works. And what is important in this presence that probably many of the viewers know is that the length of this, which is often forgotten, that Muslims have been part of the European society for so many centuries, and obviously the Reconquista was taking place, and for example, Cordoba was lost in 1236, but still it was up until the end of the 15th century that Muslims ruled, from obviously the beginning of 8th century and the military expedition of Tariq ibn Zayed refers to this historical beginning of Muslims in Spain. What is interesting about this presence is one of the many interesting books on the subject. One of them wrote by Richard Bullitt, that shows how the society of Al-Andalus was being Islamized, and he looks into the construction of mosques and how various communities were, and also the special records that show how the names have been changing from the Visigothic to Arabic names. And on the basis of this, historical records, he's able to establish the speed of the pace of the Islamization of the society. And interestingly, one may see that there was obviously no forcible conversion of the people of the book. What worked mostly was the social and economic incentives and social pressure. But for many years, even centuries, the large proportion of Andalus society was non-Muslim, which is very important, especially to take into consideration what happened after the Reconquista, where Muslims were forcibly converted or forced to leave. So this is one of the very important moments which I often remind to my students and let them remember about the tolerance of various faiths in different historical contexts, and that we should remember about that. What is very interesting, what is happening nowadays in Europe a little bit is this talk about Islam as the forgotten pillar of European civilization. It is only recently, after the Second World War, then the Jewish heritage was really acknowledged as an important pillar of the European civilization. I believe in the next couple of decades, this discussion will be only stronger, and these arguments will be made even more persuasively, I would say, to show how important was the impact of the Muslim presence in Europe to various types of revolutions taking place during the Renaissance. So the Green Revolution, bringing irrigation and new crops, the contribution in medicine, absolutely monumental, contribution in geography and in mathematics. All of this has been passed to Europeans, obviously, and it's increasingly acknowledged as a super important element of European civilization, this is also important from the Muslim citizenship point of view, where Muslims want to, in a way, show their anchoring in the European cultural sphere, but also historical sphere to large extent. So the current situation in Europe looks like this, is seen on this map. It's one of the very good maps which is prepared by my colleague and other researchers working for the Pew Research Center, that show that the religious demographics in Europe, and in this demographics, the size of Muslim populations and the percentage, the importance in given populations. What is obviously very tricky, and I'll say a little bit more about that, is that often these are not census data, what is being presented here, and these are estimations. And the estimations are especially tricky in a situation where we are talking about the second, third, fourth generation of Muslims, as we have them nowadays in Europe, and no data being collected on the religious affiliation of the citizens of a given European country. So this is very, very problematic. And I'll say a little bit more on this while I discuss the case of France, Germany, Great Britain, especially because I'll focus on these countries. And but I'll also tell you a little bit about a smaller place, such as a place from where I talk to you now, which is Poland, which, as you can see, has a Muslim population that doesn't account even for 0.1%, or it's around that number, which is a super small population. So the total, according to the estimations from, as you can see, 2016, and the situation is super dynamic. To be honest, one of the most important elements of my lectures I need to always update is this how quickly these things change. And I'll tell you a little bit as well why it changes in various countries. And probably you are aware of what are the causes, but sometimes they are not so straightforward. So how this happened that Muslims nowadays constitute such an important part of European societies. It has happened through mainly three phases of immigration that was taking part, especially after the Second World War. As I said, the immigration takes place in the case of France, for example, UK, already before the Second World War, but the social reality, the demographic reality we're talking about today is above all the result of the migration processes that have been taking place after the Second World War, which took place through these three phases, which was the pioneers that stayed mostly after the Second World War while fighting, for example, for Allied armies, due to chain migration that started later, and the reunification of families that happened after the petrol crisis in the 70s, and later the fourth phase, which is now mostly mentioned is the asylum seekers phase, which I'll say a little bit later as well. But before I tell you more about France, UK, and Germany, I want to tell you a little bit about the community, which has been of a slightly different making. And we shouldn't forget about these communities, which are sometimes small, but sometimes big. As you can see, for example, on this map, I'll just return for a second. There's a Muslim population of Bulgaria. You can see one of the largest proportion of Muslims when it comes to the whole population, over 11%. So this is obviously the third phase from the historical perspective, the Ottoman Empire, in a way, result of the fact that it was partially on this territory. But in the case of Poland, it's even earlier history. The Tatars in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, they've been living within this territory. It's for almost 600 years, so it's super long history, and they constitute today a small part of the Muslim population in Poland, but very important part. So it's around 5,000 people, but then we have important group of Polish Muslims, immigrants who are already naturalized, and their offspring, basically, second, third generation, and also people who embrace Islam, which is around 10,000. And then we have a lot of different types of Muslim immigrants, students, professionals, businessmen, refugees, who have arrived to Poland in the last decades. So the whole population makes up around 0.1, as you could say, around 40,000 people. It's a small community, but very diverse, super diverse. And this organizational landscape shows you the diversity of the population. So the Tatars is a very important group that were the only Muslims before the Second World War, and now the minority within the larger population that is made up by this huge diversity, and also very big religious diversity. So Sunni, Shias, also of different religious, for example, Sufi orders. So quite interesting diversity here. But so this is the historical, so partially historical presence, partially of immigrant presence. When it comes to Europe, the populations are big, but the number these are, especially in the case of France, it is to a huge extent estimations, because there is no census that would be asking about religious affiliation. So we do not know how many Muslims live in France, really. And as you can see, this is the interior of the Mosquée de Paris in central of Paris, and you can see it was opened in 1926. It is this presence that is very important from the perspective of building this historical. So it will be soon 100th anniversary of the opening of this mosque. But obviously, as it is the case in many other places in Europe, the mosques are not so elaborate, but they are in the former car parks, in factories. So this is the case of, for example, Masjid al-Dawa, and that's where a lot of Muslim communities, how they function. And the largest part when it comes to ethnic groups in the case of France are obviously people from Maghreb, but also very important presence of also Turks, and in recent years, a very important arrival of many Muslims from Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. Quite interesting numbers of one of the highest numbers of people embracing Islam. And the biggest centers, obviously here are some of the cities mentioned. These are the biggest concentrations of Muslims in France, but obviously Muslims are spread all over this territory. When it comes to Germany, there's been a very high rise of the Muslim population in Germany in recent years, especially after 2015 and the reception of a significant number of Syrian refugees. So in that sense, the Muslim population has very significantly grown over the last decade, but still the Turks constitute the largest groups. Now Syrians would be probably the second largest, but they are huge diversity. So before, one of the biggest influx of Muslims to Europe was during the Bosnian War, and then Bosnians are obviously a very important part. Here, the largest, I show you the photo of the mosque of the Ahmadiyya movement in Wilmersdorf quarter, which is the oldest in Germany. Very small, but beautiful masjid in Wilmersdorf district of Berlin. So these are some of the cities. Obviously, again, Muslims are everywhere. When it comes to Great Britain, it's a very interesting case because Muslim population is one of the only countries where we have a very precise data on how many Muslims live in the UK. And the Muslim population is obviously of mainly South Asian origin, but I'll show you how the situation is changing over the last years. And here I'll also show you some interesting graphs that were, this is a result of the research by social geographers from Oxford, with whom I cooperate at certain moments, that show the proportion of various types of mosques. And you can see on this that only 20% of the mosques in the UK are purpose-built mosques. Otherwise, the vast majority are converted different types of buildings. And according to this research, it's quite old, but I don't know the newest research on that. At that time, this was 2005, I think, when Karipic was doing this research. Then was, at that time, the churches constituted 1/5 of the mosques in the UK. And here you have a photo of one of the oldest ones in Dewsbury, the place where the Tablighi Jamaah movement has its headquarters in Europe. And this is the result of what is possible with the very detailed census data in the case of UK. It is possible to see where precisely Muslims live, in which parts of London. This is on the basis of the 2001 census, but there's been obviously latest census, and the latest is 2011. And this is super interesting because having the census from 2001 and 2011, we can see the change that has been taking place in the country. So what we see as a change is obviously this very dynamic growth of the Muslim community. But above all, what is biggest change visible is this largest sort of dark area here is the growth of non-religious. So non-religious people as the largest religion in the case of UK. And here you can see how the Muslim populations in various Muslim cities has been growing. So it is not a surprise that now the city of London has a Muslim mayor. Why? Because Muslims in 2011, they made up already 12% of the population of London. Over 1 million people in London are Muslims. But the largest, when it comes to the borders, you know, it's about how the borders are drawn, but the largest Muslim presence can be seen in the city of Bradford, where every 4th person in the city nowadays is Muslim. And you can see how also this has been changing over a decade, increased in the case of Bradford for 8%, and in the case of London, almost 4%. So a very, very significant growth. And here you can see, and this is very important table, I show it in order to make aware people, especially in Central and Eastern Europe and elsewhere, how about the change in the Muslim population in Europe, namely that this population, it's often still referred as immigrants, Muslim immigrants, but here you can see that 47% of Muslims in 2011, so almost a decade ago, were born in the UK. So it means that this is a British Muslim population, much more than immigrant population, that people were born somewhere else. And the last slide from this data about the ethnicity of Muslim population, you can see here how, for example, we know that South Asians obviously make up the largest part of the British population, but you can see that their proportion in the whole Muslim community is decreasing. In 2001, they made up almost 3/4 of the community, 74% almost, while in 2011, they have gone down to 67%. So, and you can see from where else Muslims refer from, what are their origins when it comes to the UK. And it's very fascinating data because not many countries which have this type of data. So what happens, which you could see on the basis of this table, is that Muslims, as I claim already in 2007 in the book, is Muslims stop being immigrants in the UK and elsewhere in Europe. And we see a very clear transformation from Islam, which is mainly of religion of immigrants, to Islam being religion of citizens. And this has a very important implications. When it comes to immigrants, they often they cherish myth of return. A lot of them still think about the fact that they will return back to their countries. Even how it sometimes happens is that they are being sent back after they die in Europe. They express their will to be sent back to the countries of origin, and that's how it happens. But this is one thing. Another element is the la double absence described by Abdelmalek Sayad, being physically in Europe, but mentally longing to the countries of origin to some extent, and not having, for example, and this is linked, and having scarce cultural capital of understanding the realities of the countries, like very in-depth understanding of the realities, language, culture of the countries where they live. When it comes to the children, the second, third, fourth generations, they're not thinking about moving to the countries of origin. Sometimes it does happen. We see some movement, but most of them do not think about that. They are characterized by very strong attachment to local and sometimes national identities, and this is part of a Muslim citizenship that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And they possess substantial cultural capital, which is a super important element. So what I show as a transformation in Islam in Europe is going from Islam of immigrants to Islam of citizens, where at the level of religion and ethnicity, when it comes to immigrants, there are very strong relationships. So being a Pakistani immigrant, Pakistani origin, for example, means in a way ex definitione that someone is a Muslim. When one is a British Pakistani, then it's not so certain that religion and ethnicity must be linked. So there's a weakening relationship. When it comes to the place of religion, up until the arrival of families in the 70s, Muslim presence in Europe has been described as hidden presence. Why? Mostly because it was linked with men who worked and, for example, prayed in their factories. And they have a very limited interactions with the host societies. When the families were brought, in a way, European societies have shown that they've realized, they've noticed the religious difference in a way, and religion became part of the public sphere. Here, the key moment is the Rushdie affair, end of 80s, and the same time the Foulard affair, as it's called, the hijab affair in France, that has been ongoing basically since the end of 80s. And what we see that this the latest element is linked with the Gellner's characterizations, which is quite strongly criticized about law Islam, linked with more elements of magic, of for example, ritualism, and less understanding of scripture, and in the case of the citizens, having better understanding of Arabic and better understanding of Islamic scripture. And this has to do, for example, with the choice the immigrant family members are making, whether they want the children to learn Turkish, Bosnian, Urdu, Punjabi, or they want the children to have a good understanding of Arabic. And often the choice is that they want the children to have, sometimes they want both, but sometimes it does happen that this understanding of Arabic is bigger. So what happens with the second and third generation is that religious identities, they become increasingly, they have a personal character. And what I describe in my research, and this is an excerpt from one of the interviews, intellectually it's not good enough that my parents' forefathers were Muslims. I had to be convinced, otherwise I would choose to abandon Muslim life and follow the life which many Westerners live. So it was this intellectual thinking process that led me to the conclusion that there is God. So what we see is there's a process of reinventing themselves, and as part of this reinvention of Muslim of being Muslim and Islam in Europe is partially linked to the process that I won't be touching so much during my lecture today, but I will be hinting this to you, because these are the absolutely crucial and critical moments when sometimes the reinvention goes wrong way. And by reinvention going wrong way, I mean the processes of radicalization, and I mean people who embrace non-dialogical and basically embrace violence in order to achieve certain goals. Acknowledge of the Muslim habitus is very interesting. Among the second and third generation, so it is there, and you can see it in this excerpt, which says that this person, in a way, that the parents did have impact, and they framed, in a way, second and third generation. And the last bit of this is very nice when this Faisal from Brussels says that they practically did it through silence. So in a way, through this upbringing in the Muslim traditions, but this has to do with the type of Islam that was practiced by first generation Muslims, often from various types of rural backgrounds that came to Europe. Stressing the incompleteness of the religious education. My parents are not the parents that would give me all the religion to their children. So, and here is the critical, I would say, opinion from Kemal in Brussels, who said, "We have more and more Muslims now that come to Islam through their own paths, and some of them become arrogant. They say, 'We know the truth, you don't know it.'" Yeah. So this is the reinvention still, the reinvention, do-it-yourself biography. And as I put it, as you hear, an equal mark, that they are risky biographies, especially risky biographies in a way that if the parents are not able to lead their children, or have no tools, they are not able to lead them the way they to rediscover this non-violent, for example, Islam. So this is very important. So to set the scene for the Muslim citizenship, I wanted to quote, give you a quote from Anwar book, but this is, I don't know which hadith is, or it's in Quran, to be honest. But there will be a time, supposedly said a prophet, that when your religion will be like a hot piece of coal in the palm of your hand, you will not be able to hold it. I imagine probably this would be Meccan periods, where obviously Muslims were perceived as a sect and as dangerous. So in a way, but this is, I think, this historical, in a way, piece obviously very nicely shows the current situation, where Muslims in Europe, especially, are under big pressure of stigmatization as a result of various types of, for example, terrorist attacks, but at the same time increasing mobilization of young European Muslims around religious identity. And as my friends Professor Busetta and Jacobs noticed in 2006, paradoxically, the radicalism of jihadist discourse of bin Laden and his followers has stimulated a form of civic consciousness among Muslims. So what I have been researching is this construction of a new type of project identity, in a way. And from my perspective, this Muslim citizenship is this type of Muslim or Muslim civicness, as I call it, a move from the Muslim identity, politics of Muslim identity, largely based on the emphasis of otherness, towards politics of Muslim citizenship that is increasingly stresses the elements of sameness. And in this process, what is being done is that the stigma is being turned into a source of empowerment, and it's possible because Islam is such an important cultural and religious and other type of space that can be taken from and important for identity. But it's important also to see the revival of the talk about citizenship in a larger perspective. And this revival of the notion of citizenship in the public academic debates is a result, I would say, of process of globalization, enlargement of the EU, especially in Europe, of the EU, erosion of the boundaries of identities of the nation states. you may say, revival of nationalism to some extent, but also there is this erosion. We cannot say that it doesn't exist. And generally, disengagement of individuals from political process. This is one of the, as Zygmunt Bauman very importantly said, one of the biggest threats to a citizen, to citizenship in a way, is individualism above all. The fact that individuals, the persons that are searching for their own ego and not looking at others around. And what I've been doing is I've been looking at the sociological citizenship following Delante and Turner. So looking not only at the level of obligations and rights, but also identity and participation dimensions of citizenship. And before I tell you about my research, the results of it, it's also important to understand why so often religion is seen as in opposition to citizenship. And these are some of the reasons I've discovered in literature and I believe are important. One of them is historical definition of a civil society as it was formulated by Thomas Hobbes, where he sees civil society as alternative to the kingdom and the church, as alternative to the power of the state and religion in a way. And in this dimension, often citizenship is seen as something that religion has nothing to do with. Awareness of religious diversity in contemporary societies and the difficulty of reaching agreement on common definition of what is a good life. And finally, evidence from social reality, especially as it is shown by sensational media, various types of conflicts, and there's no way that I can have a Muslim, Hindu, a Sikh, whoever as a neighbor, because we surely would not find a common ground. Yeah? But what we also see from research, that religion has such an important role to citizenship. Citizenship as an achievement that religious organizations help to bring about. There's plenty of research on that. And some of the potential of religious contributions to different dimensions of citizenship are the following. In the case of identity, forging connections across large segments of the population, being such an important force. In terms of participatory dimension, providing an institutional basis for political mobilization and acting as educator and generator of social capital. I cannot say it's more strongly from where I am in the case of Poland, for example, where the fall of communism and the success of the solidarity movement is completely unthinkable without the Catholic Church. And in many places in the world, the religion is such an important element of the mobilization and participation of people in this sense. And in the case of normative dimension, inspiring many emancipatory movements, nurturing sensibilities that give public life a philosophical and spiritual depth, that give the meaning of what it means to be a citizen in a way. And in the case of Europe, one of the key things that I was trying to look at is how what it means to be Muslim and a citizen in a way, and how these things are connected. And obviously, and to some extent, I was here in my research. I was also looking at how various ideas put forward by persons such as Tariq Ramadan, but he's one of many preachers Muslim preachers now in the past, especially active in Europe, that have been preaching this devout citizenship, Muslim type of citizenship, self-identification as Muslim and citizen. Muslims have to be loyal to their countries. Muslims should have positive emotional attitude to the countries and extensive knowledge about them. And Muslims are not born to be observers, a very sort of dynamic, also active, I would say, citizenship. And what I looked in my research, I looked at the Belgian and British case, and I tried to look and explore exactly this links between Islam and active social citizenship in these two cases. And I've done, as you can see, the research over 60 interviews and look at these various dimensions. So in the case of the identity, how do young Muslims conceive of their civic and Muslim identities and frame their belonging? At the level of participation, how do young Muslims account for activism in the Muslim organization and in the wider public sphere? How do young Muslims view their rights as citizens at the level of content or rights and obligations? How do young Muslims perceive their obligations as citizens? And in the last quickly 10 minutes, I want to show you some of the results of this research. So I have shown that a very significant proportion of this person's young second and third generation Muslims who have not abandoned Islam but have been using it creatively in various Muslim organizations and non-Muslim organizations, is that for them, when it comes to identity, they very strongly feel that they are both, that they are Muslims and also nationals of a given country. And my research was mostly qualitative, but there's been so many other Ipsos Mori and other research that show a super strong attachment of Muslims in Europe to their local communities and to national projects. So stressing the importance of identification with compatriots and national culture and heritage to a large extent. Then what is happening, they say, for example, I'm very comfortable being British and Muslim, in the case of Kadir in London. Or Hadija, who said, you cannot cut someone in the middle and say that this part belongs to citizenship and that to religion. Muslimness and citizenship are inseparable entities. And I think these are some of the quotes very nicely shows this manifestation in the case of identity. When it comes to participation, is activism that's beyond the Muslim symbolic boundaries. And what I mean by that is very strong engagement to willingness to engage in non-Muslim causes as well. So, for example, Murad said in Brussels, if a Jew is attacked, Muslims have to fight with the injustice done to him as if he was a Muslim. They spoke about injustice in the world, which they did. They were not only concentrated about various places of conflicts, but also saw the problems of injustice much more globally and not limited to only Muslims somewhere. This is one of the problems of radicalizations that, for example, Mohammed Sidi Khan, the ringleader of the 7/7 bombers, he super strongly, in the context obviously of the war being carried out in Iraq by UK, but he super strongly obviously attached with Muslims elsewhere, rather than with Muslims in the UK. When it comes to rights, there's an emphasis on the sameness. Quite interestingly, a lot of the Muslims in Belgium and Europe, they said that Muslims have rights to, for example, Muslim schools, halal food, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, they were ready to resign from the rights to parity, for example, and they were ready to, for example, right to state-funded religious school in the case of UK, and their requests had a character of the acculturative demands, I would say, rather than dissociative ones, like dissociating themselves from larger society. And when it comes to obligations, there was a very strong emphasis on the obligations vis-a-vis all the citizens, without distinction of creed, which is super important. And linked with that, a very high compatibility between the obligations of citizenship and demands of the faith. So, for example, Nabiha from Brussels said, our work should profit not only Muslims, but also others. Or Samar from London, who said, the obligations of citizens is not to contribute, is to contribute to the society, to do something meaningful, not only make a difference to my life, but to make difference to lives of others. And by others, it was very strongly meant that these others should be everybody else. in the opposition of this Muslim civicness, what you can see also in Europe is a model which I call here uncompromising Muslimness. And this is the other part of a spectrum in a way. And that's where some margins of Muslim populations in Europe have found themselves in recent decades, where they have, for example, super strongly, they for example said that the national project, the fact of being part of the British society or German society, it's something worthless. It's something that they were not happy about at all, and preached, for example, the importance. And obviously, you are very well aware of various groups that preach, for example, dismissal of national projects such as Hizb ut-Tahrir. Activism largely within the Muslim symbolic boundaries, unwillingness in this part of participation, unwillingness to engage for non-Muslim causes. So the only what matters is to fight and to be active within the boundaries. When it comes to rights, it's emphasis on the rights of difference, unwillingness to resign from the right to parity, and very strong dissociative demands. And finally, when it comes to obligations, there is what characterizes this type of attitude is priority being given to obligations to Muslim Ummah only, and claiming also that there is often incompatibility between the obligations of citizenship and demands of the faith. That I cannot be Muslim and British at the same time. That these two things are completely incompatible and cannot be linked. So to go towards the end, what I've been showing that this Muslim civicness is a way of is a type of a project identity where it in a way redefines the social position of Muslims, engage in it and development and transforms the social structure. And how it does it by challenging the traditional public-private sphere divide. And here, what I mean is that this popular understanding of the role of religion in the public life, and the fact that some persons say that there is no role for religion in the public life, while at the same time various religions do have historical role, and they're very much part and parcel of this public life. While the new religious groups, when they come, their role is being seen as a challenge. But that's what it does. And calling for the transformation of the existing power structures between the established and outsiders. So in a way, Muslims are not immigrants outside those who come, but those who are part and parcel of Muslim of European societies. And here, with the last slide, to conclude, I show you some of the I cannot tell you because this is part of the anonymity, but some of the persons who are on the cover of this Time magazine from 2008 are persons that I've been interviewing, and you've heard during my lecture their opinions. They are what I call in the book new Muslim elites, but these elites are very much part of the European society today. And as you could see the figures, the majority of Muslims in Europe are European born, are part of European politics, European societies, hugely contributing to these societies. And obviously we see Sadiq Khan, a mayor of London. We see important parts, but sometimes it is the everyday life activism of millions of others that makes this European societies work. And like this fantastic news from recent months are enabling us to go through such an important crisis as we go through now, which is the pandemic. And here is the photo of Ugur Sahin and Özlem Türeci, obviously, that you've probably heard about, who are one of the founders of the biotech company that has produced one of the cures, possible cures for COVID. So Turkish origin immigrants in Germany who have so greatly contributed to the possible end to the pandemic. So emergence of the European-born Muslim elite that is able to translate their religion into the language understood by non-Muslim members of a given society, I think is one of the most important developments within these communities in recent decades. And this improvement of the situation of Muslim and the more larger improvement of the Muslim communities in Europe will depend not only on the effective struggle against at least some of the forms of exclusion, and Islamophobia here is crucial, and disadvantages faced by members of Muslim communities, but also the result of Muslim efforts to reinvent and reposition themselves as citizens and full members of European polities. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Konrad, for this very comprehensive, informative, and constructive lecture on Islam and Muslim citizenship in Europe. Your lecture has many demographic and also in-depth interviews and responses of Muslim individuals in Europe, and which offers, I think, it's very both broad and deep understanding of Muslim communities and Muslim life and citizenship in Europe. So we do have two questions from the audience. One thing I think from we've heard a lot of these days, claiming that European Muslims are facing integration problems. They have been marginalized. They have been considered, like as in your slide, you said they were mostly considered immigrants, and maybe the process of being a civic citizen are happening, but still on the media and from outside we saw much of this. It seems they are facing integration problems. So how, based on your research and observation, how serious this problem is? Like, is it real? If not, then why there's such a media coverage of this issue?
Why there's such a huge coverage? Obviously, this has to do with the philosophy and character of the contemporary media. It's the sensational data, sensational information. This is what sells. So obviously, all types of incidents and mini clashes of civilizations is something that sells best. An everyday mundane, peaceful coexistence is something that doesn't sell. So this is one of the reasons, obviously, that we hear so much. Another very important element of that is that nowadays also we live in cognitive bubbles, which is linked with the algorithms and the ways how the information is being given to us through, for example, social media. It's not that all social media contribute to Islamophobia to the same extent. As research from, for example, University of Warsaw shows, it's mostly social media that has the huge, the biggest impact on building prejudicial attitudes towards all types of groups, not qualitative, good newspapers. But as we know, these are in crisis, and there are fewer viewers, fewer readers of these newspapers. So the issues are super complex when it comes to why we hear about these problems. But also, obviously, it doesn't mean that the problems do not exist. The questions of the problems of integration, the problems of radicalizations, they are very real at the same time. But they require a very well-informed policies, and also they require certain strategies to tackle them from all kinds of levels, from the perspective of families, communities, religious organizations. I think the obligations are on everyone and on every level in a way. But what is the and clearly the making it sensational and talking about Muslims bringing problems, it is something that is not solving the issues, but making it even more problematic, and showing, for example, as I did during my presentation at the end, so many success stories within the Muslim histories in Europe is one of the ways of also inspiring young European Muslims and showing them various types of strategies of life and the reinvention of Muslimness, as I have stated in my lecture.
Great. You are also expert on population. So again, there's a lot of either scholarly articles or even media report about European being Islamized, will be, let's say, in 20 years, 50 years.
Yeah.
Even, you see some social media, they make a very sensational claim that, oh, Europe will become Europe's-tan or Francistan.
Yeah.
So from the population as a growth perspective, how real this claim is, or is it just nonsense?
Yeah, perfect question. Yes, and I also said in the lecture that I will tell you more about the reasons behind the growth of the Muslim population in the UK, and I didn't do it. So obviously the film circulating on the internet, YouTube. There are so many of them, and they are so often, so many of them have nothing to do with realities. To some extent, I say to my colleagues from Pew Research that they are partially part of the problem. They do excellent work in terms of trying to provide us with this religious demographics, not only concerning Muslim presence in Europe, but concerning other religious demographics. That's what we do within CASPAR. But obviously, what all types of, as a very important saying says, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Obviously, statistics needs to be well understood. We need to understand the context. We need to understand how the models are being built, because what we are talking about. Okay, when we take this data from the British census, we have a hard data. We have affiliation that many 100,000 people said, the millions in 2001, that they feel affiliation to Islam. And then what we see the figures from 2011, and how it happened. It happened as a result of the Muslim populations in Europe are generally younger than the average Muslim, the rest of the society in a way. So by having younger populations, there is a much bigger potential for growth. But it's not true that the Muslim women have that have total fertility rate 4, 5, 6. It hardly exists nowadays. There are very few countries that have so high fertility rates. Chad is one of them, for example. The poorest country you get often would have the highest, which is linked obviously with traditional history, whatever. But what is important here is that we see that the total fertility rate is decreasing, but there is, for example, in the case of UK, the youngest of the population, slightly higher fertility rate of around 1 child per woman. But importantly, immigration still is important. Even in this Muslim Council of Britain report, it was not shown, but my later research showed that there's been over 100,000 immigrants who have come within a decade from Pakistan, for example, or Bangladesh to UK. So the immigration is still part of it. In the case of Germany, so importantly, the asylum seekers and the war in Syria that have contributed to the situation. So these are some of the reasons why the Muslim populations will be growing faster than other type of communities in Europe. And by this, that's one of the major reasons why Muslim populations are growing. But one of the things that demographers also from pure research are not able to figure out is the so-called religious switching. So we do not know how many of Muslims today will be still practicing, not even practicing, but feeling any affiliation to Islam in the future. That's something that no demographer knows about. So when the models are being built, they are built on the notion, on the knowledge that we have from today, not on the basis of what people are being asked and how they feel. And one of the elements that is totally unknown is the process of secularization of Muslims in Europe. This is one of the biggest probably questions in one of the biggest questions in the academia, in the research on Muslims in Europe, the progress of the secularization processes in Europe. And there's some research in Sweden. Colleagues from Southampton University have been already researching, for example, the secular Islam, what it means to be secular, to be non-practicing Muslim. An increasing number of Muslims are non-practicing and also feeling less affiliation. So these are some of the very big questions which we have, which do not allow us to say with certainty how the populations will be growing. And obviously we do not know anything about the possible impact of migration, from where the migrants can come and what the impact can be on given population on a given country, such as, for example, the case of Germany and a big influx of Syrian refugees that has changed the structure and the shape of the Muslim population in Germany.
Great, thank you so much. Last but not least question, we would like to hear you that for European Muslim communities, if they are really facing this whether integration challenges or this media unfriendliness, what they can do by themselves, Yes, of course, we should expect the government to give some good policies or the scholars to have more responsible to give better data. But can Muslim communities, Muslim leaders in Europe countries, including your own country, can they do something? Or is there a model they can look at, okay, this is how we should be doing, and we should keep the civicness and our religious identity in the same time, or like we can integrate better?
Yeah, I think one of the most important strategies is building partnerships. So when the mosque is being vandalized, if the communities are cohesive, if these partnerships are being built, then in the case of any harm done to any member of a larger community, regardless of their faith, the help comes from other members of the community. So in a way, if in this case, mosque being vandalized, the members of other religious communities, if they are in partnership with Muslim religious leaders, then they can they for example, well, they repair the mosque. In the same situation, if any it is in any trouble is done to synagogue, temple, gurdwara, or any kind of secular sacred building, but what obviously the partnership needs to be built not only on the basis of religious organizations. These partnerships are built on the very much human basis. Like I may think about the late Mufti for him and for Muslims in general to translate what is the problem about anti-Muslim racism. Why Islamophobia is, why certain way of talking about Muslims in Islam is problematic. So obviously, as I say, these partnerships, I think, need to be built on all levels, and I think this is the only way how problems such as Islamophobia can be tackled.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karan, for this excellent lecture and great Q&A, and especially your answer again is very informative and instructive. Thanks again, dear viewers and subscriber of the World Muslim Community Council. Thanks again for attending this lecture, and we hope to see you in the future events. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Salam.
Salam.